These ground beef recipes once filled American dinner tables, yet today you will not find them in modern cookbooks. They fed families when money was tight, portions mattered, and dinner had to be reliable. Home cooks depended on ground beef because it was affordable, flexible, and filling, and generations grew up with these meals as weekly staples. As food publishing changed, these dishes slowly vanished. Cookbooks shifted toward convenience products, restaurant trends, and picture-perfect meals. Simple skillet dinners, casseroles, and baked dishes were left behind, not because they failed, but because they no longer fit the image of modern cooking. What disappeared from print also began to disappear from memory. This video matters because these recipes explain how Americans actually ate. They show how households survived hard times, stretched ingredients, and built comfort from very little. Each recipe reflects a specific era, from wartime kitchens to post-war suburbs, and each one tells a story about daily life rarely recorded. In the next few minutes, you will see 10 ground beef dishes that cookbooks stopped including. Some will feel familiar, others may surprise you. Watch closely, because understanding these meals means understanding American food history itself and why it matters. This dish kept millions of American families fed when choices were limited and money was tight. Hamburger gravy on toast was not a trend. It was a solution. Long before boxed mixes and drive-through dinners, this meal showed up on tables because it worked every single time. The recipe became common during the Great Depression and remained popular through World War II. Ground beef was browned slowly, stretched with flour and milk, and seasoned with whatever the kitchen allowed. The result was a thick, savory gravy poured over toasted bread. It was filling, hot, and dependable. For many households, it meant the difference between hunger and comfort. This dish mattered because it taught restraint and resourcefulness. 1 pound of beef could feed an entire family. Bread that was already going stale found new purpose. Nothing was wasted and nothing was fancy. Mothers learned the recipe by watching, not by reading, and children remembered it by taste, not by name. As prosperity grew, hamburger gravy quietly disappeared. Cookbooks moved on to casseroles, frozen meals, and brand-sponsored shortcuts. What once symbolized survival became labeled as plain or outdated. Over time, it was written out of food history altogether. Yet this dish tells an honest story. It reflects how Americans adapted during hardship and how food became a form of quiet resilience. The smell of browning beef, the sound of gravy thickening, and the warmth of toast beneath it were signals that dinner was ready, even when times were uncertain. Hamburger gravy on toast was never meant to impress guests. It existed to feed families, calm worries, and bring everyone to the table. Remembering it means remembering an era when practicality mattered more than presentation. And that is exactly why it deserves to be remembered again. This dish looked strange by name, but it made perfect sense at the dinner table. Porcupine meatballs earned their nickname from grains of rice that poked through the surface as they cooked, giving each meatball a spiky appearance. What families saw, however, was a smart way to stretch ground beef without sacrificing flavor. Porcupine meatballs became popular during the Great Depression and remained common through the 1950s. Ground beef was mixed with uncooked rice, onion, and simple seasoning, then shaped and simmered slowly in tomato sauce. As the meat cooked, the rice expanded, creating a tender, filling meal that required very little meat. 1 pot could feed a large family with ease. This recipe mattered because it rewarded patience and planning. It used pantry staples most homes already had. It relied on time, not expensive ingredients. Children learned that dinner did not need to look fancy to be satisfying. Parents learned how to make food last without complaint. As decades passed, porcupine meatballs faded from cookbooks. Rice was no longer needed to stretch meat, and convenience foods promised faster results. What once represented ingenuity was quietly labeled as old-fashioned and unnecessary. The name itself began to sound odd to modern ears. Yet this dish tells a deeper story about American kitchens. It reflects an era when families cooked together, waited for dinner, and valued fullness over presentation. The bubbling sauce, the slow simmer, and the shared pot created a sense of routine and security. Porcupine meatballs were not created for attention or trends. They were created to solve a problem and bring everyone to the table. Remembering them means honoring the everyday creativity that kept families fed when resources were limited and expectations were simple. That quiet creativity shaped American meals more than any cookbook ever admitted in print. This dish carried many names, but one purpose. Slumgullion was built to feed people when options were limited and hunger was real. It was not elegant, and it was never meant to be. It was a one-pot ground beef meal that adapted to whatever sat in the pantry that day. Slumgullion appeared in American homes during the late 19th century and remained common through the Depression and wartime years. Ground beef was browned with onions, then combined with potatoes, tomatoes, or macaroni, depending on availability. Some versions added corn or beans. Others relied only on starch and meat. There was no fixed recipe, only a method. This dish mattered because it accepted uncertainty. Home cooks did not need exact ingredients or measurements. They needed heat, a pot, and enough food to fill plates. Slumgullion allowed families to survive lean weeks without waste. Leftovers were expected. Flexibility was the point. As American cooking shifted toward precision and presentation, Slumgullion disappeared. Modern cookbooks favored named dishes with clear rules and polished results. A meal defined by improvisation did not fit the new image of home cooking. Over time, the name faded, and the dish followed. Yet Slumgullion explains how real kitchens worked. It shows how ground beef became a foundation rather than a feature. It reflects households where cooking was practical labor, not performance. Every spoonful represented adaptation, not indulgence. The importance of this dish lies in its honesty. Slumgullion fed factory workers, farm families, and children who did not care what dinner was called. They cared that it was warm and enough. Remembering it means acknowledging the meals that never made headlines but carried families through ordinary days. That history deserves a place at the table again. This meal turned an expensive vegetable into a full family dinner. Stuffed pepper casserole was the practical cousin of stuffed peppers, created when time, fuel, or patience ran short. Instead of carefully filling each pepper, cooks chopped everything, layered it in a dish, and baked it together. The recipe gained popularity during the 1930s and 1940s, when ground beef needed help feeding large households. Green peppers were inexpensive and widely available. Rice and tomatoes stretched the meat, while slow baking blended everything into a single hearty meal. It tasted familiar, comforting, and complete without extra sides. This dish mattered because it respected the realities of daily cooking. It saved time. It reduced waste. Misshapen peppers that could not be stuffed still had value. Leftover rice found purpose. One pan fed many mouths and reheated well the next day. As post-war cooking evolved, stuffed pepper casserole faded. Cookbooks favored individual portions and cleaner presentation. Convenience foods offered faster shortcuts, and casseroles tied to thrift lost their appeal. Over time, only the formal stuffed pepper survived on the page. Yet this casserole tells the truer story. It reflects kitchens where efficiency mattered more than appearance. It shows how ground beef anchored meals designed around work schedules and limited budgets. Families did not need symmetry. They needed nourishment. The importance of this recipe lies in its balance. It delivered protein, vegetables, and starch in one dish without excess. It asked little and gave a lot. The smell of peppers softening in the oven signaled dinner without stress. Stuffed pepper casserole was never meant to impress guests. It existed to simplify life and keep families fed. Remembering it means recognizing the quiet intelligence of everyday American cooking, where survival, comfort, and care shared the same pan during ordinary nights that shaped lasting food memories. This dish bridged the gap between homemade cooking and the convenience era that followed. Beef and macaroni skillet dinners existed long before boxed versions promised speed and consistency. Families cooked this meal because it was filling, affordable, and easy to stretch across several nights. The recipe became common in the 1940s and 1950s. Ground beef was browned with onions, mixed with cooked macaroni, and finished with tomatoes or a simple cheese sauce. Everything came together in one pan. It fed children after school, workers after long shifts, and anyone who needed a reliable dinner without fuss. This dish mattered because it represented balance. It used pantry staples, respected limited budgets, and delivered comfort without waste. Leftovers reheated well. Portions could be adjusted without complaint. Home cooks controlled the seasoning, the texture, and the richness, shaping the meal to fit their household. As packaged food companies expanded, this skillet dinner lost visibility. Boxed mixes replaced handwritten habits. Cookbooks followed trends that favored branded shortcuts over basic techniques. Over time, the original version disappeared, replaced by instructions that required tearing open packets instead of using memory. Yet the homemade version tells a more important story. It shows how ground beef served as a base rather than the focus. Pasta absorbed flavor and extended volume. Nothing felt excessive. The meal worked because it respected limits. The importance of this dish lies in its timing. It marked the moment before cooking became outsourced to factories. It reflects kitchens where meals were built, not assembled. The sound of pasta folding into beef, the steam rising from the skillet, and the quiet satisfaction of a full table defined everyday life. Beef and macaroni skillet dinners were not invented by corporations. They were shaped by families. Remembering them restores credit to the cooks who fed America together. This dish carried a surprising elegance for its time. Meatloaf with oatmeal transformed simple ground beef into a filling, nutritious meal that could satisfy a family without stretching the budget. It was practical, adaptable, and deeply tied to mid-century kitchens where every ingredient mattered. The recipe became popular during the Great Depression and continued through the post-war era. Ground beef was mixed with rolled oats, eggs, and seasonings, then baked slowly in a loaf pan. The oats absorbed moisture, added texture, and stretched the meat so 1 pound could feed an entire family. Often, a simple ketchup or tomato glaze finished the top, giving the loaf a touch of sweetness and a golden appearance. This dish mattered because it solved a fundamental problem: how to feed families efficiently without sacrificing taste. It taught cooks to be resourceful and encouraged children to enjoy meals that were both hearty and affordable. Every slice represented careful planning, patience, and the desire to provide nourishment. Over time, meatloaf with oatmeal disappeared from cookbooks. Modern versions favored breadcrumbs, prepackaged sauces, or fancier ingredients. Convenience and aesthetics replaced the simple practicality that once made this dish indispensable. As a result, the version many families grew up with faded from public memory. Yet remembering it is important. It reflects how Americans adapted during hard times, transforming inexpensive staples into meals that felt complete and comforting. The smell of baking meat, the sound of the knife slicing through the firm loaf, and the warmth it brought to the table created lasting food memories. Meatloaf with oatmeal was never about flair. It was about care. It reminds us that the most meaningful meals were often the simplest, and that ingenuity in the kitchen could sustain entire families during challenging times. This one-pot dish was a mid-century favorite that combined simplicity with hearty satisfaction. Stovetop goulash was quick, filling, and adaptable, making it ideal for families juggling work, school, and tight budgets. Unlike baked casseroles, it came together entirely on the stove, reducing both time and cleanup. The recipe became widespread in the 1940s and 1950s. Ground beef was browned with onions, then mixed with macaroni or egg noodles and a tomato-based sauce. Some cooks added bell peppers or other vegetables from the pantry. The result was a warm, flavorful meal that could feed a large family using just one pot. This dish mattered because it respected practicality. It allowed home cooks to feed their families without complex preparation, precise measurements, or expensive ingredients. Leftovers could be reheated easily, and the flavor often improved overnight. Stovetop goulash taught families to maximize both taste and efficiency in everyday meals. Over the decades, stovetop goulash faded from cookbooks. Branded convenience meals and oven-baked recipes replaced the humble skillet version. What was once considered a reliable family favorite became labeled as outdated or plain, and the dish gradually disappeared from public awareness. Yet it tells a story about American kitchens. It highlights how ground beef served as a foundation for nourishing meals and how creativity emerged within constraints. The bubbling sauce, The aroma of cooked onions and beef, and the sight of noodles coated in tomato brought families together around the table. Stovetop goulash was never designed for presentation or sophistication. Its purpose was to satisfy, to nourish, and to unify. Remembering it honors the generations of families who relied on these practical meals, proving that necessity often inspires the most enduring and comforting recipes in American culinary history. This dish was born from necessity and wartime rationing. Ration book pies were simple ground beef or meat and vegetable pies made during World War II when ingredients were limited, and every household had to stretch what they had. They were not decorative, they were survival food shaped into an edible package. The recipe became common in American kitchens during the 1940s. Ground beef was mixed with potatoes, carrots, or onions, and encased in a thin pastry or even a simple biscuit topping. The pies were baked until golden, creating a complete meal in a single dish. Each pie could be portioned for children, spouses, or guests, making it efficient for large families. This dish mattered because it transformed scarcity into sustenance. Ration book pies demonstrated creativity in constrained circumstances. Cooks learned to balance flavor, nutrition, and availability, often improvising with what the pantry allowed. They symbolized resilience and practicality in homes across the country. As rationing ended and commercial convenience foods increased in popularity, these pies disappeared from most cookbooks. Modern meals emphasized appearance, speed, and brand-name ingredients. What had been a clever, resourceful dish gradually faded from public memory. Yet these pies tell an important story about American households. They show how families survived lean years and found comfort in modest meals. The smell of baking crust, the steam rising from the filling, and the warmth of a meal designed to feed many created lasting impressions. Ration book pies were never luxurious, they were essential. Remembering them honors the ingenuity of past cooks, the practicality that defined daily life, and the quiet legacy of meals that kept families nourished during one of America's most challenging eras. This dish was a Depression-era staple that few modern cookbooks mention: water pie. Despite its simple ingredients, it provided warmth, sweetness, and sustenance when households could afford very little. It was not indulgent, it was practical, affordable, and surprisingly satisfying. Water pie became common in the 1930s, when families faced food scarcity and limited budgets. The recipe required just water, sugar, flour, butter, and eggs, baked in a basic pie crust. Sometimes a dash of vanilla or nutmeg was added for flavor, but the core remained simple. The heat of the oven transformed these humble ingredients into a custard-like filling that tasted richer than it looked. This dish mattered because it turned scarcity into comfort. It demonstrated ingenuity in difficult times. Home cooks learned that meals and desserts did not need expensive ingredients to be meaningful. Water pie allowed families to enjoy a sweet treat without compromising their limited resources. Over time, water pie vanished from cookbooks. Post-Depression prosperity, the rise of processed desserts, and the emphasis on modern baking techniques made such simple recipes seem outdated. They were overlooked and, in many cases, forgotten entirely. Yet water pie tells a deeper story about American kitchens. It reflects resilience, creativity, and the ability to find joy in minimal ingredients. The aroma of a freshly baked pie, the crackle of the crust, and the golden custard inside created comfort and nostalgia for families living through challenging times. Water pie was never about presentation or luxury. It existed to provide satisfaction, warmth, and a moment of sweetness when it was needed most. Remembering it honors the resourcefulness of past generations and the simple pleasures that sustained American families during hard times. This dish was a quiet hero of the Depression and wartime eras: skillet beef hash. It was simple, economical, and designed to make every bit of food count. Families relied on it to transform leftover meat and potatoes into a hot, filling meal that could feed everyone at the table. Skillet beef hash became popular in the 1930s and 1940s. Ground beef or chopped cooked meat was combined with diced potatoes, onions, and occasionally other vegetables, then fried together in a single pan. Seasoning was minimal but effective, often just salt and pepper. The goal was warmth, nourishment, and no waste. Leftovers could be repurposed easily, making it an essential recipe in kitchens where efficiency mattered. This dish mattered because it demonstrated ingenuity and practicality. Home cooks learned to stretch every ingredient and create meals that satisfied hunger without expensive additions. Children grew up eating it as a dependable comfort food, while parents appreciated how it balanced nutrition, taste, and economy. As modern convenience foods and ready-made meals emerged, skillet beef hash faded from cookbooks. Recipes that once relied on memory and improvisation were replaced by branded shortcuts, and traditional methods disappeared from public awareness. Yet skillet beef hash tells an important story. It reflects the adaptability of American kitchens and the role of ground beef as a versatile foundation. The sound of sizzling meat, the aroma of onions caramelizing, and the sight of a golden crust forming in the pan were central to mealtime. Skillet beef hash was never about luxury. It existed to feed, to comfort, and to bring families together. Remembering it honors the practicality and resilience of past generations and restores a dish that quietly sustained America's households for decades. These 10 ground beef recipes may have vanished from cookbooks, but their stories are far from forgotten. Each dish reflects a time when families cooked with care, stretched every ingredient, and created meals that brought everyone to the table. They remind us that comfort, creativity, and resourcefulness were the heart of American kitchens. If you enjoyed discovering these lost recipes, do not let them disappear again. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a trip back into America's culinary history. Share your favorite forgotten dishes in the comments, and let us know which one you want to see recreated next. Join the community that celebrates the meals, memories, and stories that shaped our kitchens. These recipes are more than food. They are a connection to the past, a reminder of resilience, and a way to bring history back to life on your own table. Click subscribe now, and let's bring America's lost recipes back, one forgotten dish at a time. Your kitchen, your family, and your taste buds will thank you.